Testing. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, our workshop is scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock. I'm just going to give it another minute or two so our other commissioner can join us, and we'll see if we can see what the delay is. If he's not arrived in a couple of minutes, I'll go ahead and start, and he can join us when he arrives. Okay. Thank you for your patience. And the way it looks out there, it's pretty heavy. So we'll get started. And today, this workshop will really cover two subjects. We're going to talk about our budget, and there will be opportunity for public input as well as board input. We have a special guest with us today. We have Mr. Mike Burton, who is a representative from Stantec. This is the company who's been with Lynn Haven for about 15 years. They have done the CPI study for many years to recommend how we should approach our rate increases or lack of increases. And so if you remember at the last meeting, we tabled any decision on a rate increase for water, sewer, and garbage until Mr. Burton could come and would have an opportunity to present his findings on the study and explain to the citizenry as well as some of the new board members as to how we come to this formula and these ideas. And so I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure you are too. The second half of the workshop will be pertaining to the traffic study, traffic calming that we talked about a while back, and there will also be some opportunity for public input during that. Anyway, as we move forward, there will be opportunity for public input and questioning. At this time, what I'd like to do before we get started on this will be really our third discussion of the budget, our second advertised public hearing of the budget, and our city manager, Mike White, is going to present to the board and to the public any changes, additions, deletions, et cetera, that have been made to this proposed budget before we begin today, and we'll start there. So, Mr. White, if you'd take the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. A budget is a living document. A budget is something that we try to look at as cash flows in, cash flows out, expenses, trying to capture financial analysis, what we assume will happen during the year. It is a moving target, and it's something we look at every day when we start spending money, the citizens' money, to try to make sure we stay in line with this document. So with that said, there's things in here that may or may not occur depending on the finances of the city. So there's possibly some capital items that my management team has that will not be bought. There may be some that comes up we didn't know we needed, and we may have to come back to you, for adjustments. But with that, from the last session we had, I was wanting to go over some of the changes in this budget and bring you up to speed where we're at with those. So the first thing is we've added the $4,000 for the dog park accessories that y'all two had mentioned earlier. Also, Mr. Russell, you had changed your health care, so that's been added. My health care stipend that's in my contract that y'all approved has been added to make sure it's in there. We had a police officer that moved to corporal, so we had a little adjustment there because we had to make sure the salaries matched and the taxes matched there. There's $15,000 in there for the golf cart crossings that we spoke about last meeting. And, that's a lot of money, but, that's some solar stuff and some flashing to make sure for safety reasons. If we're going to allow them to cross the road, we got to make sure everybody's safe. I do want to bring up, I know, Mr. Dan, you mentioned to me, asked me the question about the curb-to-curb thing we voted on at last meeting. I was wrong on that. I had got a letter in July. I've got one in August, and I got the two confused. So the $7,222 for the curb-to-curb for Lynn Haven portion has been budgeted in here as well as the TPO. So they both in there. So I do apologize for that. We had added about $3,550 here in some bond interest accruals. There was about $12,000 added to because of the state pension. Fire and police, we didn't get as much as we thought we'd get from the state, so we had to make up the difference. There were some reductions in gross receipts, revenue, expenses carryover. Rails and trails was about $34,840 decrease, and Sheffield Park about $10,900. We had the CRA, some supplies and operating. We had $80,000 cost in there that was located in supplies and operating, which was at $146,000. We dropped it by $80,000, making it at $66,000 because it was also in the capital outlay equipment, so it was accounted for twice in there. So we made sure that was corrected. Long-term disability, we added some on that for CRA as well because it was not calculated in the last budget. And there's a $300,000 carryover from Sheffield Park on the CRA. With that, one of the things we also added back was the FICA, and Rob, you may want to jump in and help me a little bit with this one. Looking at the salaries of the stipend or expense that y'all get, we looked at that a little bit more, and the commission pay, we're going to move that to a payroll item, so you'll be run through payroll. With that, there will be taxation, so instead of getting a $990, y'all get a W-2. Rob, would you want to add anything to that? 1099. Yeah, 1099, I'm sorry, I said $990.
No, I mean, just to follow up, there was a question I think one of the citizens had last meeting about whether there was a W-2 or a 1099. I went back and looked at the regulations, spoke with the auditor. Our auditor kind of went through the history of how we got where we are, and although there is a question about how you can handle it either way, but I think the most conservative way is to do, especially in light of new IRS guidance that's come out, is to just run that stipend through the payroll system, W-2. And so that was my recommendation, city manager, to put it in the budget.
Thank you, sir. One thing in the budget, just some overall pictures of the budget, just for refreshing y'all's memory and mine as well. This budget has a lot more technology in it than prior budgets, and also more services. Meaning, some of the technology is phone systems. It's creating a backbone within the city here where we can share files and do things more like a corporation, I guess you would, and it make us a lot more efficient. Also, there's we're looking at taking back the Nation's building and creating a service center there. So that's in this budget, where we can allow our citizens to pay through a drive-through. And pay, deposits. Also in here is revamping the website where we can pay online. And also utilizing Munis, something we're paying for. There's a lot of things in here that pertains to that it's the infrastructure to make that happen. Re-emphasize, we only added one employee in this budget. And offside of that there is a lot of contract labor in this budget to offset some of that until I can get familiar with all the different departments and what kind of talents we have. I think that's the most appropriate way to go. A lot of training, HR. We're looking at adding a new baseball field, upgrade, some of the baseball facilities, the dog park fences, some equipment, some lighting in the gym, and also the 2 splash pads. And a lot of this will be funded through impact fees, and that's the only thing that can be spit on. So, if on the like splash pads, that's going to be funded through these impact fees. Already mentioned something about the adding the drive-through over there and moving services. We got some money here looking at a small business incubator, helping some of the micro businesses in the city, get their feet up under them and make them a growing company. I hope they'll stay here in the city. Painting City Hall, library, the chambers, that's going on. If you notice already, I've had the guys go ahead and start cleaning around City Hall, getting the old shrubbery out where we can paint the building good and make it look like a asset that all the citizens are proud of, and go back and redo the flower beds. And the fire and police department, a lot of safety equipment we had to have. We hoped to get grants, but we was unable for the fire department. Some of the oxygen stuff and backpacks, they have to go in fire, so we had to purchase that. That was pretty expensive. We're looking at a K9 unit, something we have not had. So that's a big plus on the safety of the citizens. Some more vehicles, another training tower we need out at the fire department, a 3-story where they can do proper training and be ready to assist citizens if needed. And this, as well as the half-cent sales tax, surtax, continue moving forward with that. There's some things in there on it. Vehicles, equipment, the $225,000 stormwater master plan. That's something that has never been budgeted here. That's a big chunk change, but it's something I think we all agree at this table. Got enough phone calls during the rainy season. It needs to be looked at, and that way we will have a plan for the future. And even in here, one of the upgrades we have is update the AV equipment. Ian's done a great job trying to keep that going. It's getting close to 20 years old, and try to interface that sometimes with the internet, it gets hard. So we want to make sure that we can interface and do things right. That's a lot of the overview of things. I really don't want to go back through the numbers unless y'all want me to. But the other biggest thing, I guess, in here, and I gave it a lot of thought between the last meeting and this meeting, is the rates. Y'all did pass the stormwater rates, which is the 1.9%. And that was based on the study as far as the other utilities as well, which was done in 2010. I'm comfortable to say that was way low to do that, but every little bit helps. We're not collecting but about $500,000 a year in stormwater, and to balance this budget, I moved about $1.4 million from water and sanitation. So I'm not building any reserves there, but after doing that, I still had about $140,000 deficit that will come from reserves and other places to try to make it balanced correctly. So what I've thought about doing and ask y'all to think about today, before we vote a little bit later, is look at leaving the increases in the budget. I'm not going to suggest that we do the resolutions to pass the actual rate increases at this time. What I want to do is, I have today with Michael Burton, which the mayor has mentioned earlier, and he's going to explain a little bit. What I want him to do is update these studies first. I look at today, I cannot tell you that these studies are accurate. You talk about a time 2010, we're just coming out of recession. There's a lot of different things in cost. Cost right now is, Bobby and I was talking about it the other day, some of these projects are about 30% higher than what they were used to. So we're not getting as much done as we had hoped. And it's just, demand. And it's driving, supply and demand is driving. So what I hope to do today is y'all think about leaving the money in there. Let's do the studies, then I can bring the studies back to you, and unequivocally I can whatever rate increase or rate decrease that the studies come back with, I'll at least have numbers to justify. and you'll know what the actual costs are of the city. With that, I'd like to ask Mr. Burton if he could come up to the podium and go over some rate stuff with y'all.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Mike Burton. I was the president of Burton and Associates for almost 30 years, and we did most of our work with the city of Lynn Haven as Burton and Associates back when John Lynch was here, and then since then also. We were acquired by an engineering firm in December of 2015. Actually, there was 2 acquisitions. It ended up with Stantec, which is a big international engineering and planning firm. And the Burton and Associates, we had about 17 people. Now we have about 30, and we're the financial services group within the entire company. And we're still doing the same kind of things, out of the same offices and all that. So, but anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to working with you folks again. I talked with Mike today. We did a number of studies for you from 2010 back. I think 2707 might have been solid waste. But and he's right. It's you're beyond the time when you can really count on the projections in those studies necessarily being accurate, because not only the passage of time, but as he mentioned, we've been an unusual time from 2008-9 to today. So what he and I talked about, and what I think I'm giving you a proposal to do, and I think what you want to do first is water and sewer, and we have a proposal to do your other enterprise funds too, but to do a revenue sufficiency or financial sustainability analysis. There's 2 parts to a rate study whenever you do a utility rate study. One is what I call the revenue sufficiency analysis. It's a 10-year forecast that it makes sure that you collect enough money to do everything you need to do. The other part is cost allocation and rate design, which means you're collecting it fairly among your customers. You don't need to do that second part very often. You need to do the first part. You need to update it probably every 2 or 3 years. Even though you look at a 10-year forecast and maybe you're looking at 5-year projected rates, things can change, so you need to do a validation. I did.
Try.
I didn't talk fast enough.
You're done.
Thought it sounded different there for a minute.
And if anyone in the public is having difficulty hearing anything, please feel free to move closer, pull up, whatever you need to do to be able to hear and see.
Okay, is that better now? Okay, great. So what we're proposing to do is the first part, the revenue sufficiency analysis, part of the rate study. I was telling Mike today, we're very busy this time of year going into the end of the budget year because all our clients are doing what you're doing right now. But come October, we still have work to do, but we're not nearly as busy. So it's something that we could jump on right away in October. And within 60 days, we could get back to you with preliminary results on the study. And within 90 days, we could be complete, and you could probably have it adopted. And the way we do the work is interactively. We have a model that reduces it down. There's a lot of stuff going on in the model, but we reduce it down to 2 graphical outputs for you to look at. Kind of like managing your own personal household finances. Cash in and cash out, and reserve balances, okay? You can spend more money than you make as long as you have a big savings account, but that delta has to come out of the savings account. And so these graphs show you the financial health of your utility as you go forward into the future. And then we can determine what level of adjustments to your rates are necessary for you to be sustainable and have the cash in and cash out on top of each other, and have your reserve balances stay at levels that are appropriate for a utility like you. And we can meet with you, and we meet with staff first in an interactive work session to be sure we have all the data right, all the assumptions correct about escalation of cost. The capital program, we even talked today about possibly looking at doing some AMI metering as you go down the road, and looking at do scenarios in our analysis to say, here's the baseline if you keep going like you are, and here's what it would look like if you did say you wanted to go into some AMI metering. And so we could put some capital dollars in there to do that. And also, as you do that, you'll have increased revenues because the meters will start reading more accurately. Meters get old, they don't read as fast. They don't read as accurately as they do when they're replaced. So, and then we'll get with you, the board, and we'll come with the model up, and it'll be projected up on a screen, and you can see the control panel, you can see those two graphs, you can see the rates, and we can work through a solution with you as to what you want to do and how you want to proceed to be sure your utility is sustainable. And then after the water and sewer utility is done, it's up to you as to what you want to do at that point, whether you want to do another couple of your enterprise funds or what. So I think that's a decision, Mike, if I understand, to be made later tonight. I think you just want to talk to them about the water and sewer part of it. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do and how we go about it, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions if anyone has any. So.
Yes. So we're talking about a regular study of these things?
Actual study, which the studies are in the budget, and what I want to do is leave, those as place markers in the budget, the different rate increases as far as the 3.9, like for water, 3.9, because that's the way the old study was, but I do not have a lot of confidence in that study.
Right. What is the cost of a new study?
The budget.
And I think everyone was at sort of a consensus at the last meeting that we felt that the study was old and that we needed to look at it more carefully. So I think that's where we left off. It was not a reflection that we thought it was a poor study, just an old study that needed to be looked at again.
Mayor, I might ask a question while we're looking
Go
that
right
number
ahead.
up. Thank you. Just some of the elements in the forecasting, do we take into account the growth of Lynn Haven? Okay.
Yeah, actually, that's an excellent question. The baseline says, we started with saying, okay, what if you just don't do anything? What if you don't raise your rates?
Right.
Okay, you just go forward. The only way revenues grow if you don't do that is through growth. Okay, because a growth unit of revenue is whatever it is. And the incremental cost associated with that is not very great because it's basically chemicals and electricity. So growth is a good thing in a utility. You do get to increments, though, when you have to add capacity and that type of thing. So
right.
We'll see how that works out. But, yeah, growth, and we'll look historically for the last 3 to 5 years and see what kind of growth you've had. We have to really be careful, though, because of the time we're in from 2008 and the economic times we're in. But what we want to do is have some rational basis for saying, what do we think growth is going to be going forward? We'll get with your development folks to see what's in the pipeline. Yeah. And over the next couple of years, there may be some significant projects coming down the pipe, and we'll include those. Good. And then after that, we'll have to come up with some dull roar assumption about growth that'll happen in the subsequent years.
And then on the expense side, do we account for some of the upgrades and?
Yes.
Okay. So
we take your budget, so we'll be doing it in October, so we'll be doing it in the budget that you're just about to approve, and that'll be our test year, if you will. But then what we do is we look historically, because we're going to ping off of that test year going forward in terms of O&M expenses. So if you have an anomalous expense in that year, some budget line item that's particularly big or particularly small compared to what it usually is, we want to normalize that going forward. So we look at every detailed line item in your budget, and we counsel with your staff about how that should escalate. Insurance typically has been escalating at different percentages than commodities. So we go through that and do a very detailed analysis of that. And the capital program is another one. I might beat you to that question. we put a complete line item detail of every capital project that your staff and your engineers have developed or will develop through the process. And then the way the model works is it goes through and it says, here's in each year, revenues minus expenses, that's net income. Do we have any existing debt service we have to pay and any coverage on that? And then do we have any cash left over? And do we have enough reserve balances? And then it goes over and it says, here's our capital program. It first tries to pay the capital projects out of existing reserves above your minimum level or cash that you're generating. And if you don't have enough to do that in any year and you still want to do the projects, the model will identify borrowing that's necessary to do that. And then it flows the debt service back into it. So it's a very robust and comprehensive analysis, but it's also very, very flexible. We can change all of the things we're talking about on the fly while we're in interactive work sessions with you and work towards solutions right there together. So.
Mm-hmm. To answer your question as well, we'll have to offset some of those, like he said, some anomalies such as the half-cent surtax. Those capital upgrades to water and wastewater and some storm water, we don't account for it twice because that's coming from a different funding source.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we only want you to pay for stuff that this fund needs to pay for.
We don't want to pass that on to the ratepayer because they already paid for it once. To answer your question, water's around $28,991, sewer $26,356.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question. Mr. Burton, does your company, has it in the past also done the studies for the other cities and the county, Bay County and all the other cities, or do you know that?
You're the only city we've done in Bay County. Okay. We do, we've been working for Okaloosa County for probably 20 years, too, and we do their work.
Okay.
And I think you are our 2 Panhandle clients.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Burton? Does anyone from the public have a question that you would like to bring forward to Mr. Burton while he's here about the rate study? Yes, ma'am.
To speak for fewer, I think you can hear me. I was just wondering how long the new study takes. You probably mentioned it, but I couldn't hear everything.
Yeah, in 30 days, from getting the data, we'll get back with staff and have our first interactive work session preliminarily with them. And then we'll have to go back and do some homework after that. So in another 2 or 3 weeks, we'll come back and do the second interactive work session. So we're just under 60 days at that time. And at that point, we'll be ready to present to the board. So within the 60 to 90-day period, we can work through with you and come to an implementation. So I would say 90 days to the end and 60 days to have the preliminary results.
And so that would be well in time for a mid-year look at the budget?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, either before the holiday break or immediately after, wherever you wanted to do it, or halfway through the year, however you wanted to do it.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, in your studies, will you do anything on this development in the fuel depot down there? Figure their cost and everything coming into our infrastructure?
Well, I need to know more about what's happening with the fuel depot. We did a study for you a while back before Mr. Lynch passed away, and I'm not sure what transpired since then. Mm-hmm. But if they are a customer or will be a customer, they will definitely be included in our analysis. So,
well, that'll be part about the new growth when you get with the different departments, like our planning department.
Absolutely.
They'll be able to take, because even today we're going to be looking at 2 new plats. I mean, 1 new plat with 82 homes. So
wherever it's happening in the city, if you have new development coming, we want to have that in the pipeline in our growth. So
and they have indicated, the developers have, that they want to see vertical movement out there very quickly, but they might be able to add at least a forecast of what's coming within the next 2 to 3 years, so that it would help to make the study more accurate, I think is.
So the fuel depot is moving forward as a development?
It has closed, and it now belongs to Marina Island LLC,
Awesome.
And they are, I haven't
great.
spoken with them in the last couple of weeks, but I know that their intent is to begin immediately with some sort of development out there.
That's great. That's good to hear. So.
Did that answer your question, sir? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one quick question, not for you, sir, but for the city manager or commissioners. In the meantime, while this study is ongoing, do we carry the proposed rate increases forward, or do we freeze the old ones?
My understanding is that we stay right where we are until.
Okay, and then adjust after the study?
If we should decide, based on the study that an increase is necessary, and or if we may decide to go in the other direction. So we're where we are until the study's complete. Yes, ma'am.
In the study, we'll project new growth, right?
Yes, ma'am, it will.
So that would be
And the
maybe compensate for, instead of increasing the
Well, the new growth produces revenue that would otherwise have to come from increased rates. So you're right, the growth is very important.
And we're growing.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
positive.
good. That's a good thing.
It's a positive.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I would just like to thank you, Mr. Burton, for coming, and I would also like to applaud the commission for being open to having Mr. Burton come instead of just relying on the old study and moving forward in a usual way. I think this is very innovative, and I think it's good that we're doing it. And Mr. White, I applaud you as well. So, okay.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. We really look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
All right.
We do
Take
too.
care.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Okay, at this time, I would like to open the floor for discussion or questions about any of the items that Mr. White brought up about the budget that are new, or if you have some questions still hanging about in your mind that we maybe haven't talked about enough. And then once the board has finished with their questions and discussion, at that point, I would open it to the public if you have questions about any item on the budget.
I have something I want to bring up. I actually would like to make a motion, if that's possible, to...
Well, not during the workshop,
Not
but later.
during the workshop, okay.
But you can talk about whatever you want.
Okay. What I'd like to do is see if we could table the part of the budget concerning our stipend increase until it's been brought to my attention that according to the charter, we must first create an ordinance and then do a referendum before we can have an increase. It's on page 4 of the charter.
And there's been discussion about that this week, but could I let Mr. Jackson address that?
Sure,
Because I think he
there's a
can-
long history there. And how far back you want to go, but for basically, that is in the charter. There's a conflict between the charter and the code on that. The code says, there's a section of the code that says it can be approved by ordinance. The charter says that it can be approved by ordinance, but it must go to a referendum approved by that ordinance to be approved by the voters. The origins of that go back almost to the beginning of the city, and the original charter had a salary of the commissioners of set by ordinance, but it couldn't exceed $1 per month. And that was it. It had to be approved by ordinance. And so what the commission did years and years and years ago is they had set a salary of $1 per month, and then they started a stipend to cover their expenses of being commissioners, basically the travel, the going out, the kind of, and so that's the tradition that has been in the city for 50, 60 years. In 2000, and that has gone up consistently when the budget, we amended it by the budget process, so it was $500 and $600 went on up. So it was $1 plus whatever the stipend was. In the early 2000s, just before I became city attorney, there was a massive charter change that went to the voters. It had a bunch of different changes in the charter, kind of updated it a little bit to more modern times. One of those charter changes was to delete the language of $1 per month, because that was from the original 1911 or 13 charter, and just put in there set by ordinance. But there was I don't know if it was a compromise or whatever, but the language about approved by referendum was added in there. And so that was in the charter as of 2001 or so. What the commission has done since then is basically the same thing. The ordinance approved the commission continued to pay itself $1 per month salary, and then a stipend that was approved in the budget process, $500 or $600, whatever the amount was that per year. My understanding is that right now that the stipend is $623 and $723 per month. It appears that $23 is the dollar plus some COLA increases that were in there over the years that were budgeted, and so I spoke with the city manager about this. The commission considered a charter change in 2007, and we actually drafted an ordinance to resolve these conflicts. And so to take out that language in the charter that said it needed to be approved by referendum and just say it could be approved by ordinance, but that never got approved by the commission. Never went to referendum. So we still have this charter conflict right now. We have a conflict between the charter and the code, is what we have. And so the issue, as far as my recommendation would be, if you guys want to resolve this once and for all, is to get a charter change, and that would have to be at an election time to do that. As far as what the commission has proposed, what's in this budget, is it continues to do what we've done before, and basically it continues the dollar salary, and then the stipend that's approved by the budget. The only difference is that in light of some comments from last time, we went back and looked at the IRS regulations about how those are paid, and there are ways that you can pay it's called non-accountable plan, where it's via 1099 or as an employee. And just because the way the IRS has been enforcing that lately and been looking at these kind of issues, the city can always opt to pay via W-2. And so that was my recommendation, to go via W-2. And so just from a policy standpoint, if the pay is tied to a referendum, which must be approved by the voters, anytime there's a change in economic conditions, you'd have to have a referendum, which is expensive and time-consuming. And so whatever the commission looked at this back in the late 2000s to try to resolve this. If you guys want to try to go forward with that, that's something that we could consider, but I mean, it's really up to you. So
I've just had a lot of people bringing up the issue, obviously. It's pretty much all I've talked about for 2 weeks. And this is the Lynn Haven Code, by the way, that it says here.
yeah, there's a section in the charter, and then there's a section in the code.
Yes.
So the charter is different than the code.
Okay.
The charter can't be changed except by referendum. The code can be changed whenever you guys want to change it by ordinance.
Okay.
Yes, because the code actually says that it's changed by ordinance. It's the charter, which in my opinion trumps the code, is where it says
Right,
referendum.
and what the commission has done in the past is not, the compensation was the dollar.
Right.
Basically, and the stipend was for an expense reimbursement. And so that, that's what the commission has done for the last almost 50, 60, 70 years. It needs to be cleaned up, more than likely. And, if you guys are free to do whatever you want to do with that, I mean, and I'm here to help, so.
Well, I'd just like to suggest that we get it all so it makes sense, so that, when people read it, everything correlates.
I think that's a good idea.
And I would just like to suggest we do that, get it together before we do this. But
I agree wholeheartedly that the charter and the ordinance should match. But on the other hand, I also agree that, or believe that for the sake of the present commission and for those who will, come in before, and there's 2.5 years basically almost before then, that to move Lynn Haven forward, to keep us in line, we are the second largest city, and even with the increased stipend, it's historically been done the same way, we're still paying ourselves an expense account a third less than the other cities, and we're the second, largest. So, it always sounds distasteful when an elected board, we're the only ones who can do it, and so it's just a matter of, do you want to pay out of your pocket to serve as commissioner? And I think that probably everybody, on the board does that at some time. They say if you list those things you give to charity or whatever, that those don't add up in the end, so we won't do that. But I think that Lynn Haven is probably, in my opinion, it's one of the most progressive, moving forward, fastest growing cities, and we need to have people on the commission who are, moving in a forward direction. And if you're having to worry about what you're spending just to, drive your car around, and not to throw anything toward the city manager or for others, but Panama City Beach pays their commissioners almost as much in a car allowance as we pay for all of our expenses. So if we were doubling our salary from $50,000 to $100,000 or something like that, but when you're talking about moving it from $7,000 or $8,000 to $14,000 or $17,000 to cover expenses on the board, I just don't see an issue with that. What you said, as far as us at the next ballot time, at the referendum, bringing that ordinance maybe out of the past a little bit, there's a lot of things there, and there's some other things in that charter I think we could look at as well, the ordinances, to try always to update. But those are just my thoughts. Does anybody else have?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I would totally be in support of trying to get the code lined up with a charter, because I think the charter is our foundation and everything should fall back to the charter. So if that needs to be, and of course that has to be done by referendum, so I'd be in full support of that. As far as the compensation increase, as I mentioned at the first workshop, I completely agree that in order to attract people that are going to give their time and their education and their experience, we have to attract those folks with some type of compensation. And I think as Lynn Haven continues to grow and the challenges that we face, I think, I think we need to get with the times as far as what our compensation is like. The only thing I would suggest is maybe we could come to a slight compromise and just phase it in over the next couple of 2 or 3 years. So it's not done all at once. So that's kind of what I suggested at the first workshop, but that's kind of where I would be. And then that way, I agree, that way, if we can do it in such a way that by the next election cycle, folks that are looking to serve would see that the compensation is what the new compensation would be, and/or forecasted to be if we approve it in such a way. That's all I have to say.
And my comment to that, which I very much respect, I think that's not a bad idea, but it's almost every time that you bring it up, it's going to be the same discussion again, and it's just almost like, it's just take responsibility for what we need to do and do it, or, that I just have a little different
I appreciate,
take on that, because it's that same discussion every time, and anyway, I'll just leave it there.
And I can certainly respect that position 100%, because we don't want to do this. I mean, this is my second term, and we've talked about it. Nobody wants to do it, so it is what it is. But yes, I totally agree. In order to, you got to compensate people for their time, and I want nothing more but to serve, honestly, for me personally speaking. But it does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, and I love it though. And I'm sure you do as well. But I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree. It is something that just needs to be looked at and done.
If I may, I completely agree with you, Mayor, and I understand your concept too about wanting to spread it over time. If we're going to do it, I think we need to do it. I don't believe in kicking the can down the road. And I also, from dealing with the last election we had, the biggest issue was golf carts. In my opinion, that was a minimal issue with this city. But that encompassed the entire election. I don't want 2 years from now a salary to encompass y'all's election. That's all you talk about. So in my opinion, if we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's get it over with. That way it will be a non-issue in 2 years when y'all's 3 seats are up for vote.
I don't, and I never think it's a non-issue, but I do agree. But for example, over the last 2 weeks, and I have the greatest respect for the media, I really do. But the main, with a budget the size that we have, with rate increases, with studies, with all the things that we have going on, the only question that any media member wanted to talk about was the commission. 3 years ago, when Panama City Beach gave themselves 150%, increase plus the car stipend, it was all about the media and that one issue. So there's always distrust. I know that I'm probably the most conspiracy theory person in the world about government. I like less government intrusion, but anyway, I've kind of stated my position. But as far as if the next election I have 1,000 people who say, well, because you felt like that you were, spending $17,000 and that's too much, that we don't want you to be mayor anymore, well, then I'll just live with that. Hopefully that won't be the case, but we'll see.
And my whole goal was just that I don't want that to be a topic that is going to encompass the race.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay.
Did you say, was I announcing? No, I love being the mayor. That's fine. That's fine. It's too early. And Commissioner Barnes will find out his thoughts, I guess, later when he's here. Okay, there are other comments on the budget, other questions? Mr. White brought up several items.
Not related to the budget, but what do you think the time frame of being able to get the nation's building open and operating?
What's got 5 more months? He has 5 more months. I understand he's already has a building in sight, so I imagine, and he's going to stay in Lynn Haven Commons, which is great. I hope as soon as he leaves, I'll be getting with our guys and try to start developing a game plan to get get it knocked out and quick, because I'd hope that once he moves out, I hope within 5 to 6 months, have it open, functional. It will change a lot of the things that we do. You know, the street behind the thing will become a one-way street. When you go through the drive-through on the north side of that building, you'll only be able to turn right because we don't slow down traffic. So there's a lot of thought. I have Panhandle helping me design to make sure traffic flow goes the right way. We still make sure that we have a lot of ADA accessible areas, and just kind of open it up. And it's going to give us a lot of parking places and for employees and people to do. One of the biggest things I've seen when I got here was a lot of the elderly people through the weather having to try to get out of their car, walk across the street, or people with kids, or sending kids in and crossing that street. There's a lot of cars go across that street, so it scares me. So I think we can, move planning, move a lot of different departments over there and service the people and have plenty of room for employees.
I think it's a great idea. I think that drive-through of people not having to get out of their cars, and it's going to alleviate the danger and also, speed things up. And I know my own mom, she does not trust the postal system with her water bill. She delivers it in person, so that will be great, and I'm sure there are a lot of other people who feel that same way, so.
I do have one question. In the general fund, I just noticed that from the first time we met to the second time, and I haven't even looked at this third one here, that we doubled the fees. And I just want to make sure I understand this. Is this for new buildings or new building? Page 16 on the second. We've gone up 100% on permit for gas. We've gone up 80% on plumbing, mechanical, all those issues.
Yeah,
Is that for new building?
No, ma'am, that is just some costs associated. If you look to the left right there, you'll see through 8/30/17, we had spent $745, and originally, we only had $1,000 in there, so they opted to put a little extra cushion in there, and some of that is looking at some of our buildings, we don't have a whole lot, but it's very minimal dollars there. You're looking at $600.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It looks like a big percentage, but it's real small when you look at the number.
Are there other questions from the commission? Welcome, Commissioner Barnes. Mr. White had just listed some new items earlier in the budget that he had basically just some cleanup and some changes that he had looked at, and so now we're going back through it.
And I apologize to the commission. I got tied up in a meeting, so.
We're glad you're here. Any other questions or comments? At this time, then I would, and if others questions come up, we can readdress, but at this time, before we move to the traffic calming part of the workshop, I'd like to allow time for as many questions as we need from the public. If you have a specific question about this budget or a specific comment that you would like to address to the commission, to the mayor, to the city manager, this is your opportunity. You're welcome to approach the podium. Yes, sir. Right? Yes, sir, right here on the front. Would you please come to the podium so we can, it's just very difficult for everybody to hear. Thank you, sir, very much.
I just wanted the committee to realize whenever the budget goes up and the utilities goes up, somebody in the city's paying $3 or $4 a month, and they're not getting a pay raise. And everybody else around, Gulf Power and these other companies, this is the time of year they go up. So you're going to wind up paying out a lot and not getting anything in. If you get a raise through Social Security, they turn around and give it to Medicare. You don't get nothing.
A very valid point, and I agree. I don't want my water bill to go up either. I live right over there, so I'm with you on that. Yes, sir, in the back.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, just a couple. First, on the raising the stipend, I think you guys deserve every bit of that and more. My question is that it needs to be done legally, and I'm concerned, is there a legal challenge if this is done? If not, I'd say do it. If there's a basis for a legal challenge because the charter doesn't allow this, then that really brings up a serious question.
I think that was the question that Mrs. Tender asked earlier, and the attorney addressed it by talking about that it's really a language issue it's an old language issue, but as far as the amount, that it's been done many, many times.
Well, I understand it's been done, but I think the charter language is very clear, as Commissioner Friend said, and that's what I was concerned about, just the legal basis.
Mr. Jackson, you want to address?
Sure, I mean, there's always a basis for a legal challenge. I mean, there's, that's something that is always a risk. The way the commission has done this in the past is they've treated the salary as compensation, and the stipend is really just reimbursement. Okay. And so the charter states that the referendum, that it must be approved by ordinance, which must be approved by referendum. The ordinance was approved back in 1913. And so, that's the position the city has taken over all these years. As far as the stipend, that is approved by ordinance also, because the budget's in the budget, and that's an ordinance that's approved. That's just not approved by referendum, but that is not compensation as the charter is discussing. Has been the position the city's taken, and the argument is we just need to resolve that once and for all.
Yeah, if there's, I think, sufficient distinction between stipend and the $1 salary, then I think it's good. Would really behoove you guys to explain that well with the media or whatever, because people tend to look at that as a salary. And I understand what you're saying, the distinction between the $1 and the stipend. But then, again, the basis, though, is you guys deserve that more, in my mind. So, a question on page 8. This is just wondering there on the streets, on general fund expenditures, on the outlay. Does that include the surtax infrastructure, the $3.9 million?
I didn't hear all of your questions, sir. Would you?
This is page 8.
I got that part.
Okay. On the expenditure, capital outlay for streets, about halfway down.
Yes.
Of $3.914 million. And my question is, does that include the surtax infrastructure?
Beverly, we put some of that belongs to the enterprise fund, the surtax in the enterprise fund, and some of it in the general.
It's in the surtax. Surtax is in the general fund.
Okay.
It is. We have almost $4 million included as expenditures in the budget.
So it's in the general fund.
Okay, so then that
Yes,
would include that. And there's a little bit of confusion as that gets spread throughout different outlays. And I don't know, it might be helpful to have a separate sheet on surtax that tracks it to its various places, just so we can understand where that goes.
Sure.
A question on page 16. This is 3 lines down, local option 6% fuel tax. And the question is, are we raising that? Is that 19% at the far right just expected increase in revenue, or is that a raise in our gas tax?
Expected increase in revenue.
Okay.
Yeah, that's from the state.
From the state numbers.
All right. And a question down at the bottom of the same page on the Florida Border Improvement Grant for Porter Park, that we are including that. I thought that was spent last year when we did the work on the ramps, but yet we're showing that as an outlay for 17-18 as well. And if we didn't spend that, did that grant get extended into next year? But I thought that was spent last year on Porter Park.
There was a portion of it, but it's not.
But the grant was 200.
We were looking, I know, at the $50,000 increments as they came in, but.
That's a reimbursement. The grant, I knew there was something there. The grant has not been paid to us yet, so we got it on there to be further paid, reimburse us.
That explains it, too bad. The next question was also on the infrastructure, and you guys already answered that. Thank you. I believe that completes my questions. The rest of them, there's one more. The rest of them really were questions about the surtax, as it appeared that it appears in a bunch of different places through there, but I think I understand that now. So, but it is confusing, so I'd recommend somehow to allow that surtax revenue to be tracked better to where it lands in different spots, different pots of the budget.
Yes, sir. For the committee that will be looking over, the oversight committee will be looking over that. We'll have pages for each road, and each thing, what happened on that road, if we had $30,000 in stormwater, we had $500,000 in road, and then all those numbers tie back into the budget.
And then just one question, I don't want to bring up any sore spots here, but it's a curiosity. So last year, you guys voted down a splash pad, and this year we're voting in 2. And I've just wondered what the rationale is, the change from last year to this year?
I could clarify on that one, if I may, sir. I was the one who brought up the idea, I think years ago, maybe Commissioner Friend had asked for a splash pad out at the Leisure Services Park out on 390. I was not aware of that, being the new mayor, but I had suggested or asked for permission to privately fundraise for one. So I've been doing that all year, and those funds are coming in. I think we're right now a little over, maybe right at 7,000, somewhere. I don't have the exact figure today, I apologize. But the city manager, Mr. Schubert, as well as Mr. White, brought to attention that there's $300,000 in impact fees, which cannot be spent for paving, cannot be spent for infrastructure, have to be spent at leisure services for some service. And so he brought it up that possibly we could start a splash pad at each of those parks, which was, service more children, more families, depending on which park that you went to. I asked the commission if I was, if I would lean in that direction, would I still be permitted to make mine a partnership and continue fundraising? And so that's kind of where we landed. Of course, we've not approved the budget, but in the workshop we talked about it, and it seemed that we had a congenial consensus type of discussion about it.
The revenue side of it takes some of the intrigue out of it, which was, on the surface, there is some intrigue in that, so I'm sure you guys would understand. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your questions. Anyone else? Mr. Walker?
Rich Walker, 1106 Michigan Avenue. I want to thank the city manager for taking almost everything I had on my tickler file off the list.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. However, there are a few things remaining. Just a little information. The reason we got in trouble over stormwater management was years ago, maybe 10, I was asked by a citizen what happens to the water management.
Mr. Walker, I want to interrupt just for 1 second. If you'll keep it to the point, like of the question rather than the history, because we've got still another topic to discuss today. And you can ask your question, but I mean, with all due respect, at the last meeting, you and Mrs. Walker had 58 minutes of the workshop time. And so please ask any questions that you want to ask. But the history of the stormwater, that's years ago. Questions about today's budget.
You continue to do that, okay? As a lawyer is usually asked by a judge, I'll rephrase the question. The question is, and I'll put it to you, is why did we get in trouble with stormwater management? The answer, and you asked me a long time ago, don't come up with a question without having an answer. That was the last commission meeting. And the answer is the following. City manager diverted the money from the stormwater management to the general fund.
I think we're in
where it was disappeared. So for 10 years, that's why we got in trouble. And I enjoy finally taking the enterprise funds and putting it where it should belong. Thank you. The next question here is, on page 41 of the proposed final budget 926, 2017, 2018, number 1, it establishes a new office with a new budget. Under the personnel schedule, CRA director, 60%, 40% economic development director. This proves a long-established point. 1, the CRA director was not employed to full capacity, and his workload did not measure up, and implies that the CRA salary and benefits should be halved. The need for an economic development office within the city staff, besides a singularly targeted Bay County Economic Development Office, which we pay for $20,000 a year. We don't get any support from them at all. Page 80 of the reference shows some breakdown in staffing for the Community Development Agency. Fact, the city requires Economic Development Office and a director and a budget. It appears to be a part-time employee. Then hire a person to do this. We would save insurance fees, pensions, workers' comp, retirement, etc. In addition, the employee would fall under the supervision of the city manager. and can devote all his energies to the task he's assigned. This would be similar to the building department, the city attorney, city engineer, which are outsourced to private companies. The city attorney, also similar to the second CRA director, which was outsourced to a non-citizen of the United States, a non-citizen of Lynn Haven, and in addition, similar to when the executive branch of the CRA was outsourced, to a private company. This would release our presently underworked CRA director and future tasks when and if Bay County, allows Lynn Haven to undertake additional, possibly another CRA area. It's recommended that you take a look at this new office, how we can save money, and use our employees at the direct way, which is in the budget. Next, the question is why didn't the commissioners listen to the citizens when they brought up the subject that they were being paid incorrectly? They were not following the charter. I'd like to know, my question to the city attorney, what trumps what? Does the charter trump or does ordinance trump? That's my question.
The charter trumps.
Thank you.
That would be my opinion, at least. Yeah.
Thank you. All these years, the citizens have brought, thank you very much, sir, have brought this up continually. You've mentioned it over and over again. It was brought up. You're going to set a precedent if you continue now and vote an ordinance and raise your salary. You're going to forget about it, and you're not going to change the charter. I happen to agree with the mayor here. It's about time we got this right, and that should be put correct. And that's
Thank you.
Comments and
Thank you.
questions on the budget.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions or comments from the public on the budget? Okay, from the board, anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, at this time, we have about 25 minutes before we move to the CRA portion of the meeting today. So if everybody could look at the traffic safety policy and procedures. If I understand correctly, Mr. White has basically taken what we've had in the past and just put it into sort of a clean form, is that correct, so that everybody could look at it?
That is correct.
For those in the public who may not have been here for the previous workshop, which was several meetings ago because we've had other things to come in that we had to address instead, it's really been one of my concerns, and I think it's one of many people's concerns, is our traffic safety in Lynn Haven. We have 77 dividing our town from, one direction, and we have 390 from another. We've had hit and runs. We've had, unfortunately, loss of life with a cyclist, a very dear friend, teacher here. And so we wanted to look at this. I have a large number, I'm not going to read their names, but I do have a large number of residents that have given me their streets, their address, asked for relief, asked for, the commission to act with stop signs, with speed bumps, et cetera, to calm down the traffic. And my position that I stated at some point earlier was that I would like to see us move to a much more simpler form of how we could get these traffic calming devices in place. Rather than having people having to go from door to door, getting a petition signed with 60 people and having that done within a certain amount of days. I mean, everybody's busy. There have been some traffic studies done since that meeting. I had listed streets that residents had talked to me about, like 5th Street, Georgia, where people were cutting off of 390, 17th Street by Kane Griffin Park, Colorado, for the cut through to the country club from 390, where people had asked me, mostly mothers asking me because they're concerned for their children. So they did go ahead and do traffic studies on those areas, and I'll let the city manager kind of talk about that. So my position is that we need to make this policy much more simple, so that if you are a resident here in Lynn Haven and you have an issue on your street with people cutting through from major roads or people just speeding by your house or putting your family and others around you in danger, that you could come to the commission and just say, we as a neighborhood would really like to have a stop sign on our street. or we as a neighborhood would like to have a yield sign, or we, something, more police protection, maybe more, something there, that by addressing the commission, you could get immediate action, rather than having to go through this bulky list of tasks to do, because it is bulky. So that was the position I took. I brought it to the commission, and everybody, I think, agrees that we need to maybe make some changes to this to look at making it more simple for citizens. So that's my take on this, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. White, I'll let you go from there, and then we'll open to the commission and then open to the public. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I think it's very prudent that we start with this little graph I gave each of you. And these are the roads that y'all mentioned to me, when I first come on board, one of the first workshops we done. And Bobby and his guys put out our machines to try to capture all the data we could as it relates to the cars and these specific roads. Some of them are very surprising to us. If you go to the third chart, one of them that sticks out is, looking at some of the max speeds on, we had somebody on Virginia Avenue going almost 61 miles an hour, 17th Street, 63 miles an hour, and several of the others are in the high 40s. We had one that was 41. That was New York. And all these roads are a lot different. If you turn to the next page, the posted speed, like for Virginia, the posted speed versus the 85th percentile. The 85th percentile is 85% of the cars, this is the speed that they're traveling on that road. So you can see on Virginia Avenue, it's posted at 25. Most of them are doing 37 miles an hour. On 17th Street, it's 30 miles an hour, they're doing 34, so they're within range. But we also had some speeders on 17th, if you remember. Colorado, 25 and 30. Georgia, 25 and 29. New York, 25, 27. So a lot of these streets, a lot of people are driving correctly. Virginia, throws up a big red flag to me.
And that's actually 5th Street, correct?
Yeah,
It's on
Virginia
Fifth-
Avenue on 5th Street.
On
yes.
5th Street.
It's that corner.
Yeah, that corner.
Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
yeah, they do fly by there.
Also, the last page
It's by Mrs. Tennell's house.
Yeah.
Yes.
gives a lot of data. That particular street was just speaking about on 3 days, the number of cars that go across. We set the number of cars was 3,859. So the average speed difference on that road was almost 12 miles an hour. That was the average that was going.
I got to ask. Virginia and 5th, in a 3-day period, had almost 4,000 vehicles.
Yes.
They cut off there from Southport to go to the beach.
To miss the traffic signals and go down Tennessee. That's what we've been talking about.
That is amazing.
Yeah. It's not amazing to me. I see it every day, and so does Mrs. Tennell. It's just so passionate for me. I just can't believe it.
And 60 miles an hour. Who in their right man would drive down a residential road at 60 miles an hour?
Well, you look at 17th Street, you had 4,089 cars, and, the max speed someone was driving on it was 63 miles an hour. And, we did see some trends. It looked like maybe the same person early in the morning, late in the afternoon. We did see some trends because we captured date and time stamps. You can see some of that's at 7 o'clock in the morning. And some of it is at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Off target real quick. I recommend that you have this piece of equipment out all the time. Because I talked to Roy about that, and on Colorado, there's somebody that speeds every morning and every afternoon, every morning and every afternoon. So if you've got that kind of information that you can relay to the police officers, let them know, and they can even determine the type of vehicle is by the weight. So they can actually instruct the police officer what kind of vehicle to look out for. I think it's a good deterrent, and I think it'll be a good piece of equipment for the police officers.
Or if they know what time this same person is coming by, let's just set a car out there.
That's the whole goal, is they can tell them the time, they can tell them the type of vehicle, so that the police can, effectively use their time better.
Colorado, 3,265, Georgia, 985, New York, 2,590 cars, and of course, Redbird Street, 595. But these different charts, this is just, I've done some charts here where you kind of paint a picture for you, give you a better idea of what's going on. But why I'm saying this also, where it go on record, is Connecticut, we've been writing a lot of tickets on Connecticut. We understand the speed humps are out. The speed humps are going back in. It just, that's one of the things we got to go back over. So if, I know some of y'all have gotten calls, I know Dan has a lot, we're going to put them back in. It's just, that's one of the punch list items we got to get done. But, and a lot of this, because we've wrote quite a few tickets on that street. So, we're going to use some of this data, and that's a good thing to look at, is using equipment a little bit more often. It does give us a lot of data. But I think these roads right here are a good starting point for y'all to discuss, what you want to do with traffic safety. Do you want a document like you have now, and how you do things? Do you want to simplify it a lot? Do you want to follow the I'm trying to remember the...
I don't know.
MUTCD. I was going to get a couple letters backwards. MUTCD. There's a lot of different options you can go with, but and these could be some of the first beta testing roads that if y'all want to enact something that we can look at.
I just need to ask a question for clarification and from my understanding. MUTCD is a federal document that everyone follows. Is that correct? Okay. With that being said, how are we going to, as a commissioner, Rob, you may want to jump in on this, if a citizen comes to us and say, I want a stop sign, how are we going to bypass the MUTCD?
I have my thoughts.
Legal.
Legally, we have power over municipal roads as a commission.
The statute says that the city has power over municipal roads, as long as it conforms to the manual and specifications of the Department of Transportation. And so I have been looking for exact clarification on exactly what that means, and I have not been able to find a specific site that says we must follow the federal guidelines. There is an incorporation by reference in the Florida Administrative Code that cites not to this specific section, but a similar section that says that we hereby incorporate the federal highway mandate for traffic control issues. And so, the municipalities have home rule powers, generally. They don't have it for traffic control issues, though, because that's all been preempted by the state in 316. And so the question becomes, in this particular section, does that authority require us to use the federal guidelines for a stop sign or not? My recommendation would be to follow the federal guidelines. If you're asking me, do we absolutely have to? I don't know the answer to that yet, and I will continue to look. I haven't found something that says cities must follow the federal guidelines, period. There's a lot of, I haven't found a city that hasn't filed it yet. Most cities adopt their own policies. So if we adopted a policy that referred to the federal guidelines but said that, here's the criteria we're going to use, that we may have enough room and home rule to do something different than what the federal guidelines require. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but.
I mean, I understand the safety of this, and I totally get this. I'm just concerned if we don't get ourselves in a pickle if we're not following this federal document. That would be just like in education. If I had a student that had an individual education plan and we're not following that plan, we can get our hands slapped. I'm just making sure that the city is not going to fall within that same guideline.
Let me give you an example. For instance, let's say the federal guidelines say, I have no idea what they say, but let's say that there's I think I saw once, there's 5 accidents in a 12-month period. And, we do a study or we've determined that there's 4 accidents in that period. And the commission says, it's close enough, we're going to go ahead and allow a stop sign there, and our policy allows that. I mean, would the federal government come in, or the Department of State come in, or the Department of Transportation come in and say you can't do that? I mean, I don't think so. As long as we follow an organized kind of here's our process that we adopted, we considered it. It's in our policy. It allows us to make these kind of minor variations, and so that may be an instance where we don't actually 100% technically follow all the federal guidelines, but might be able to put a stop sign or some other, traffic control device in there. But you still refer to it, you still use it, it's still very, I don't think, do I think that we have the power to put stop signs anywhere without any kind of study or review or investigation or anything for that matter? I would say no. I mean, I think that the city has to have a basis for its decisions. There needs to be some basis for it, whether it be a citizen complaint and then a review like the city manager did, or looking at our policy. We have a policy in place now that says we'll follow the federal guidelines. So if we change that, I think the model that the city manager proposed refers to it. It doesn't say we absolutely have to follow it. I mean, it's not real clear either way, but.
I just want us to be very careful in allowing stop signs or yield signs or any other traffic calming, that we don't get carried away with putting these devices out there. I mean,
I will tell you, when I was reading some of the MUTCD, a lot of the areas that we would even, that we may think in our head that, yes, we need a stop sign there for some reason, it would not qualify because of the number of cars it requires, the code requires, the federal guidelines requires to go through there, or, some of the speed, 85 percentile, some of the speeds and things of that nature, because sometimes it will not fit, where, some of these roads. So there's got to be some kind of happy medium if y'all decide, or if y'all decide to do something totally different. The way we looked at some of these roads right here is like I did add the committee part in here. I had the fire chief, police chief, myself, Bobby, and our engineer, Chris Forehand. He was in there. We all sat down and looked over all this data. We recalled, how many wrecks we had here, look at speeding, a lot of different things is looked at. So that did help give us a basis. Plus, we had the raw data, which helps out a lot. So from staffing point, I don't have really a big one way or the other. But I think it would be prudent always, if y'all thinking about a stop sign somewhere or a yield sign or something, that we do some comprehensive studying like we did here.
yeah, and I appreciate this information. And I guess the next step, what I'm about to ask is, once you have your committee together and your committee goes out, they gather all the data, then will there be a recommendation made to the city as to which traffic calming device is needed to satisfy the problem?
My intent would be to give you some options. Being that y'all the governing body of the city, I'd much rather y'all make that decision if you decide to put anything or not. But
May I just read what Florida statute says? I know, with all due respect to Mr. Jackson, it says, this is from the Florida statute, okay, our state, not the federal government, Florida. Pardon me? It is section 36, my microphone went off. It's section 316006, jurisdiction. And then if you look at number 2 under that, it's municipalities. Wow, that's really loud, sorry. It says chartered municipalities. Could y'all turn me down? Just thank you. Shall have original jurisdiction over all streets and highways located within their boundaries, except state roads, which will be 390 and 389, or County Road 389 and 77, and may place and maintain such traffic control devices which conform to the manual and specification of DOT upon all streets and highways under their original jurisdiction, meaning that our stop signs have to be red, they have to be hexagonal, they have to conform to those statistics. B, a municipality may exercise jurisdiction over any private road or roads or over any limited access road or roads owned or controlled by a special district located within its boundaries if the municipality and party or parties owning or controlling such roads provide by written agreement the municipal traffic control jurisdiction over the road. So basically, the commission and the mayor, if someone comes, and with all due respect, Commissioner Commissioner Barnes, your home is at the end of a road in a subdivision. You don't have cars passing by you. Mrs. Tennell is at the peril of her life every time she goes out on her corner if she wants to cross her street, because as the study showed, there were about 4,000 cars coming down that street. And Mrs. Tennell, I mean, with all due respect to the study, Mrs. Tennell didn't need the study to tell us that. She was right. And she knows her road is dangerous. So, I mean, I have no problem if Bobby and his group have the time to go out and, to all these roads. But basically, every road that citizens ask for, everybody said they were surprised by how many cars were on them. The citizens who live there are not surprised. They know. They know what their situation is. So, anyway, I've kind of beaten this down into a dead horse, as they say in the old, I mean, that's just my position. I think we need to give our citizens some relief. Florida statute supports it. Our attorney tells us that he's looked and he can't find any place where it says that we don't have the jurisdiction to kind of deviate from this a little bit if we want to. He can't find a case, which probably means there's no case law for it. So that's my position.
Mayor, if I may, and I agree completely that the chart shows that a stop sign needs to be at Ms. Tennell's. One of the people that contacted me lived on Redbird and swore up and down they had to have it at Redbird. And the information shows that obviously he's,
But there's a lot of cars for that street.
Yeah, but what I'm explaining though is, or I'm trying to explain is, and I don't know if 500 or 550 cars are a lot for that street for 3 days or not, but each person has a vested interest in their street. So you can't just, and not saying anything about Ms. Tennell or you can't just immediately assume that the resident, because he's got a vested interest. I'm all for the city doing this, but we have to have a procedure, in my opinion. And I cite the example of my neighbor that wants one on New York, or not my neighbor, my friend that wants one on New York, and I said, I'd love to put one there for you, but we have to look at what it's going to do to Georgia. Because when you put it on New York, you're going to divert the traffic to Georgia, and now Georgia's going to have an issue. So
and Georgia already has an issue with cut-through from
sure.
390, and we've had we've had 2 pedestrians hit in a hit-and-run on New York. So those,
So I believe that something needs to be done. I think that it's cumbersome what is there now. I don't know what the answer is going to be with the MT, whatever those initials are. But I would suggest that the commission look at setting up a procedure. And what I would like to say is that if a citizen makes a complaint of a problem, then we go put the traffic equipment out there,
Right.
look at it. We ask the police chief to give us his recommendation on that information. Let's ask the fire chief to give us a recommendation on that information. Let's ask the city manager what he recommends, and let's make a decision with the council. That way we've got a procedure in tow that can be done instead of the commission just automatically putting a stop sign somewhere that
well,
needs
I
to be
think
done.
that is very sensible, and I think it also makes this a lot smaller. I applaud that.
And that's what I'm getting at. I'm not totally against this, Mayor. It's just, I want to see a procedure, but I want it to take a step further, and you tell me what best traffic calming device is there. I don't think this commission is prepared to make a decision that we're going to stick a stop sign here, a 4-way stop over here. You guys have the data. Bring it back to us and let us know what's best.
And
that's
not
still
a
just a
problem.
couple of steps, though. I mean,
Right.
it's not this. I mean, we've been saying that we have to go by this federal document, and I mean, if we could get it down to a couple of steps, the citizen comes
1,
forward,
2, 3, 4,
we have a
5.
study, and we make a decision. That's 3 steps versus this.
Mayor.
One of the things that we as the little committee I had put together, we did evaluate the MUTCD as a reference tool because it is kind of statewide. And with this, I would hope that y'all would be okay with us still doing that because it does give us some guidance. But that's not a problem what you asked at all.
Mayor, if I may. I think as far as the statute's concerned, it may just end up being one of those things that we'll have to wait until until we're challenged, if at all. If we're challenged on the statute and or the way our policy reads, then that's just what we'll have to wait, and then it'll just happen. I would offer up, like I did last time, if you'd want to look at Florida versus Ingram, there is a case. So Florida versus Ingram. The only other thing I wanted to offer up, and I apologize if I didn't make copies and give these out last time, but this is just some other calming devices that I want to give to the city manager so that as the committee meets, maybe some of these other type of slowing down or traffic calming devices would work as opposed to a stop sign. And I'm not against stop signs, I'm just saying these are alternatives like speed cushions,
Sure.
speed humps, chokers, those type of things. So I'm just going to give that to the city manager.
Thank you.
And maybe we can also look at some of those things for traffic. But also, I just would like to take the opportunity, since we're talking about traffic, is bring up speed limits. I don't know that we have a policy for speed limits, and the statute, I think, is a little more clear on speed limits, that we as a municipality can set speed limits based on residents, and we don't have to, we can say that this area is a residential area, so the speed limit can be 20 or 25. And I just think we need to take a look at some of the different areas and determine and make a decision, is it a residential area or is it not? And then going back to 17th Street, actually, part of that says 25, and then there's a 30, and then there's another 25. So I think we need to look at that pretty quick.
Consistency in there.
Yeah, well, all of 17th Street, I don't know if we changed it from 30 down to 25 and forgot to remove 30 or what, but I got a few calls on Mosley Drive, for instance. We went from 30 to 25. If it's a residential and we say that we think 20 or 25 is better for a residential area, let's do that across the city. So 26 comes to mind. We went from 25 to 30. So anyway, that's the only, I think we need to put that maybe in the policy as well, or we need to have a policy for that as it relates to traffic.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I like that.
Thank you.
And that could actually fall into that same procedure. Citizen files a complaint, and then you go through the process. Pretty simple.
The only thing I might disagree with you on, Mayor, is if we have a policy and procedure, I like having policies and procedures as elected officials so that the residents don't have to come before the commission, so that we're working for them. So we create these policies and procedures to follow.
I think that I was maybe not clear, because I have nothing against having a policy. I just don't like this policy. This policy is cumbersome, and it puts a burden on the residents.
I'm just saying, I'd rather eliminate them having to come before us to ask for it. I like having a policy saying, hey, here's the policy that we voted on, and this is what it is. But anyway, and I agree, we've always agreed that that's a little too encumbersome.
And so if a resident, if I'm hearing what you're saying, if a resident were having an issue, like Mrs. Tennell has brought forward, that she wouldn't need to come before the commission, she could just call the city manager and say this, and then would you please enact this policy, let's start the study on my road, and go from there.
That's the way I like to
The committee would have to come to the commission for
approval
of whatever traffic calming device they wish to put out there.
And
so the city manager could not make a decision based on...
And I can tie in, we can tie in the same thing with speed areas.
I would prefer that it not have to come back before the commission. If the commission approves the policy and the procedure, and then it's in the budget, for instance, if the committee comes together and says, we think a choker is going to work better on 17th Street, and it's in the budget, then I don't see it having to come back to us. We set policy, we set procedure, you set procedure. We set policy, you set procedure.
Exactly.
We're done.
If I may, what happens when a citizen disagrees with the committee's decision? Then they're going to come to us, and then do we have the right to override the committee?
I think make a recommendation about
We're
the
the final
policy.
authority.
Oh, I know. That's why I would rather see it come before the commission
So
each
would
time.
I.
I don't want to see
That's
I would rather see it set up as, and I've actually got it written down so I wouldn't forget it. First step, citizen files a complaint. Second step, the city does the traffic study. Third step, the city manager gets a recommendation from the fire and police department on what they think the policy, or whether it deserves it or not. City manager makes an overall recommendation and the commission votes. Simple as that. It's 5 steps, done, and it can be done within, if somebody filed a complaint on a Thursday, we should be able to have an answer by the next commission meeting whether we can vote for it or not. It shouldn't take 2 or 3 days for that to work out.
At times, yeah, it depends on the weather and,
Because the committee you're asking for is the police chief, the fire chief, and the director of public works.
Plus they have-
That's
and
a
the
pretty,
engineer.
and the engineer.
Yeah.
And that's putting a burden on their time. I mean.
not
It's still.
within the month, I'll make sure everybody's awake.
But not to mention that in the policy, or in the committee has to consider the engineering study as well. So you're not going to have time to do these numbers.
Oh, yeah, those numbers are, that you can ask Roy. He puts the equipment out, comes back, plugs it in. He has that answer within an hour of him bringing
But that's
equipment.
only one day. I think you wanted, I think if I was a committee member,
Oh, yeah, I
I'd
know,
want at least
but-
3 days worth of
okay,
data.
And that's what we got, is 3 days worth of data.
The other-
But a computer presents that information to him immediately. It's not
Right.
done by an engineer.
Yeah, no,
So-
but if we're going to follow the MUCD, that it does say engineering study in some cases, is all I'm saying.
Well, it
So you're
depends.
going to, the committee's going to get stuck in a loop there. I just think if we set the policy, and there is a procedure, and we approve the procedure, we're
Out of it unless
we're
there's
out
a
of it. We
problem.
don't have to see everyone. I mean, you're not going to please everyone. Any policy we create today is not going to please everyone in the city of Lynn Haven. So you're always going to have people that's going to circle back around and say, I don't like the policy.
Well, we've run out of time again on this, but I think that, I mean, I really do think that we've made some progress
Absolutely.
today. I really do. I think Commissioner Russell, has a nice compact list there. I really like your idea of the citizens kind of being able to bypass, having to come before the commission. It's a burden on the citizens to have to come and do that. Maybe they could even do it by just an email, something like that. So I think we've made progress. What I would like to do, I would like your thoughts on it, is that we do one more meeting, and our goal at that meeting would be for us to put down the steps, maybe tweak them a little bit, maybe add it all. I think Commissioner Barnes, his underlying idea that we don't want to, we're not throwing away the federal policy, but just picking the parts of it that we feel that we have to have so that we're not in direct opposition to it. Maybe just pick the best of it and come up with something by the next meeting that we could put on the agenda and vote, and then people could get some relief, because this has been going on for a long, long time. So is anything else, Mr. White?
What I will do on y'all's behalf, because I took a lot of notes, I will revamp this and give you something to start with.
That's
That work?
perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would suggest that we make it a single-issue workshop, because we have kicked,
Yes,
this is
we-
another one of those cans we
It
kicked down.
has been kicked a few
Yeah,
times.
let's do a single issue, that way we can get it taken care
Yes,
of.
but city manager has been under the constraints of state statute with budget, so it's not his fault that we've had to combine, topics. So I congratulate everybody for their
Just so I'm clear, Mayor,
ideas.
there'll be another workshop before a commission vote?
Is that the pleasure of the
Yeah, okay.
commission? I think we need another workshop so that we can draft something out based on what Mr. White has said he would do. Is that good with you, Commissioner Tender? Okay. Anybody from the public, before we dismiss the workshop and move to the CRA, is there anything that you would like to input about what we've said about traffic calming? Yes?
William Carr, 1500 Massachusetts. The last time this came up under a workshop, I gave you the manual that said you have to follow the MUTC.
Yes, you did.
And I gave you the chapter and where it's found.
Yes, you did.
Now, when you want something bad enough, you will read into a statute what you want to read into it, and you will take away what you don't want to take away. And you cut me off because you didn't want to hear what I had to say. That manual...
You're speaking to me, then I
Yes,
cut you
ma'am.
off?
Yes,
I don't
ma'am.
think
That
I did.
manual, you said my 3 minutes were up. That manual tells you from the Florida Department of Transportation that you have to follow that manual. That's the first thing it says, period. And 4,000 cars in a 3-day period is not what it goes by. It says 300 cars per hour in an 8-hour period. That's 2,100 cars. There's not a street in this town that does that in an 8-hour period. Not a street. But that manual is the one that says you have to follow the MUTCB. And I told you guys that. Look it up for yourself.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Vouch for that. Virginia Avenue. I live on 16th and Virginia, and that is a road from 390 to the delivery to Mowat School, middle school, where you go in their gate there and drop the kids off. And that traffic in the morning and that traffic in the afternoon is just bumper to bumper practically. And since they opened up that 17th Street across, people that want to go to 390 will cut through there, come down 16th Street and out in Virginia. I've got a 4-way stop there, supposed to be, and at 37 miles an hour, that's about the speed they go through it. So, well, I suggested to some of the people that you put a speed bump in the right lane of the 4-way stops. So they can't say, well, I tore my car up going over it because they got to stop there to get over it, and they can make their turn. They don't go over another speed bump. But if they put those speed bumps in the right lanes at four-way stops, it might slow some people down. We've had some wrecks there, too.
Thank you. Hopefully there'll be some relief, sir, very soon. I hope so. Anybody else have a comment, question? Okay, we thank you so much for participating in this workshop. We'll now be beginning our regularly scheduled CRA meeting. We'll take just about a 3-minute break, and then we'll start 5-minute break. Okay, so we'll start back at 5:43. How about that? We'll just start at 5:45. How about that? That'll work.